The air was thick with tension as Karen stormed through the double doors of the hospital, her designer handbag swinging wildly at her side. Her perfectly coiffed hair was now disheveled, and her face was contorted in a mask of rage. "This is unacceptable," she screeched at the helpless receptionist cowering behind the counter. "I have been waiting for over an hour, and no one has even bothered to acknowledge my presence." The other patients in the waiting room shifted uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances as Karen's tirade continued to escalate. Her shrill voice echoed through the pristine hallways, drawing the attention of a well-dressed man who had been quietly observing the scene from the corner. This man, unbeknownst to Karen, was none other than the hospital's CEO, a respected philanthropist known for his no-nonsense approach to managing the institution. He watched with a mixture of amusement and irritation as the entitled woman continued to berate the visibly flustered receptionist. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Karen demanded, leaning over the counter and glaring at the young woman. "I am a major donor to this hospital, and I expect to be treated with the utmost respect." The receptionist, her hands trembling, tried to explain that there had been a mix-up with the appointment scheduling, but Karen cut her off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I don't care about your excuses," she spat. "I demand to see the manager this instant, or I will have your job." The CEO, who had been quietly observing the spectacle, decided to intervene. Straightening his tie, he strode over to the counter and cleared his throat, causing Karen to whirl around in surprise. "Madam, I couldn't help but overhear your, shall we say, lively discussion with our receptionist," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I'm the hospital's CEO, and I must say I'm quite disappointed to witness such behavior from one of our valued donors." Karen's eyes widened in horror as she realized the identity of the man standing before her. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, her usual bravado suddenly replaced by a sheepish silence. "Now, if you be so kind as to follow me to my office, I believe we have some matters to discuss," the CEO continued, his gaze unwavering. "I'm sure we can find a more constructive way to address your concerns." Karen, feeling the weight of her actions, had no choice but to meekly follow the CEO, her head bowed in shame. As they made their way through the corridors, the other patients in the waiting room couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction at the comeuppance of the entitled woman. What awaited Karen in the CEO's office, and how would this encounter shape the rest of her story? The stage was set for a captivating tale of entitlement, consequences, and personal growth. As Karen followed the CEO through the hospital's corridors, her mind raced with a mixture of fear and apprehension. She had never encountered such a swift and decisive response to her usual theatrics, and the realization that she had potentially jeopardized her status as a major donor only added to her growing sense of unease. Upon reaching the CEO's office, the man gestured for Karen to take a seat in front of his desk, which she did with a reluctant sigh. The room was impeccably furnished, exuding an air of professionalism and authority that only served to heighten Karen's discomfort. The CEO settled into his chair, folding his hands on the desk as he fixed Karen with a stern gaze. "Now, Miss Karen, I must say, I'm quite disappointed by the behavior I witnessed out there. As a valued donor to this institution, I would have expected a more, shall we say, diplomatic approach to addressing your concerns." Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes downcast as she struggled to find the right words. I'm sorry, Mr. CEO," she stammered. "I didn't realize who you were, and I just got so frustrated with the wait, and The CEO raised a hand, silencing her. "That's no excuse, Miss Karen. As a leader in this community, you have a responsibility to set an example, not to berate and intimidate my staff." He leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. "However, I understand that sometimes tensions can run high, especially when it comes to one's health. Perhaps we could find a more constructive way to address your concerns." Karen felt a pang of guilt as the CEO's words sank in. She had always prided herself on her ability to get what she wanted, but this was a situation she had never encountered before. Faced with the prospect of losing her status as a major donor, she realized that her usual tactics might not be enough to appease the formidable man sitting across from her. I'm truly sorry, Mr. CEO, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to cause such a scene. I was just so frustrated with the wait, and She paused, swallowing hard as she gathered her thoughts. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. The CEO nodded, a faint glimmer of approval in his eyes. Well, that's a start, Ms. Karen. Now, let's see what we can do to address your concerns in a more constructive manner, shall we? As the meeting continued, Karen found herself surprisingly engaged, listening intently as the CEO outlined potential solutions to her issues. For the first time in a long while, she felt a genuine desire to cooperate and make amends, a realization that would ultimately prove to be a pivotal moment in her personal growth. As Karen sat in the CEO's office, listening attentively to his suggestions for resolving the issue, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping up within her. For years, she had relied on her status and wealth to get her way, rarely ever having to face any real consequences for her entitled behavior. But now, faced with the prospect of potentially losing her position as a major donor, Karen found herself in unfamiliar territory. The CEO's calm, measured approach was a stark contrast to her usual impulsive outbursts, and she couldn't help but feel a growing respect for the man who had so effortlessly put her in her place. Now, Miss Karen, the CEO said, leaning forward in his chair, I understand that you're a busy woman with a lot of demands on your time. However, I must insist that in the future, you treat my staff with the same level of respect and courtesy that you would expect for yourself. Karen nodded, her eyes downcast. I understand, Mr. CEO. I don't know what came over me. I've just grown so accustomed to getting my way, and The CEO raised a hand, cutting her off. That's no excuse, Ms. Karen. We all have a responsibility to treat one another with dignity and respect, regardless of our station in life. Karen felt a sudden pang of shame as the CEO's words sank in. She had always prided herself on her generous donations to the hospital, but now she realized that her actions had tarnished that generosity, casting a shadow over her philanthropic efforts. I'm sorry, Mr. CEO, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I will do whatever it takes to make this right. I don't want to jeopardize my relationship with this hospital. The CEO nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Well, that's a good start, Miss Karen. I appreciate your willingness to make amends. He paused, reaching into a drawer and pulling out a stack of papers. Now, I have a proposition for you. Karen's brow furrowed as the CEO slid the papers across the desk. What is this? This is a volunteer program we've been working on for the past few months, the CEO explained. It's designed to help patients and their families navigate the often overwhelming process of receiving medical care. He leaned back in his chair, fixing Karen with a pointed gaze. I think it would be an excellent opportunity for you to get more involved with the hospital and to learn to appreciate the needs of those we serve. Karen stared at the papers, her mind racing. Volunteer work? This was not the type of task she was used to tackling. She had always been the one being served, the one making the donations and calling the shots. The idea of putting herself in the shoes of the patients and their families was a daunting prospect, one that challenged her very notion of how the world should operate. But as she sat there, the weight of her actions bearing down on her, Karen realized that this could be an opportunity to not only make amends, but to truly grow as a person. With a deep breath, she looked up at the CEO, a newfound determination burning in her eyes. When do I start? Karen's first day as a volunteer at the hospital was nothing short of a rude awakening. Gone were the days of being escorted to the front of the line, her every demand catered to without question. Instead, she found herself navigating the maze of corridors, lugging supplies, and interacting with patients and their families. A far cry from her usual interactions with the hospital staff. As she made her way through the bustling hallways, Karen couldn't help but feel a growing sense of discomfort. The sounds of crying children, the murmur of worried voices, and the occasional wail of a stretcher being wheeled by all served as a stark reminder of the human element that she had often chosen to ignore. Her first assignment was to assist in the pediatric ward, helping to distribute snacks and keep the young patients entertained. Karen approached the task with trepidation, her perfectly manicured nails and designer outfit standing in stark contrast to the brightly colored walls and the whimsical decor. "Hi there," she said, forcing a smile as she approached a young boy who was sitting on the edge of his bed, his eyes red from crying. "My name is Karen, and I'm here to help make your day a little brighter. Can I get you a juice box or a snack?" The boy looked up at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and distrust. "I want my mom," he said, his voice small and trembling. Karen felt a twinge of discomfort, unsure of how to respond. She had never been particularly adept at dealing with children, and the thought of comforting a sick or scared child was entirely foreign to her. "Well, I'm sure your mom will be back soon," she said, her voice laced with a touch of awkwardness. "In the meantime, I have some really yummy snacks that I think you'll like. What's your favorite?" The boy stared at her for a moment, then slowly shook his head. "I don't want anything. I just want my mom." Karen sighed, feeling a growing sense of frustration. This was not what she had signed up for. Where were the grateful patients, eager to shower her with praise and attention? As she moved on to the next bed, she couldn't help but feel a pang of resentment. Why was she, a woman of such importance and privilege, relegated to the role of a glorified candy striper? Surely there were more pressing matters that she could be attending to. But just as she was about to make her excuses and leave, a soft voice caught her attention. "Excuse me, miss?" Karen turned to see a young girl, her bald head a testament to the ravages of chemotherapy, looking up at her with hopeful eyes. Can you read me a story?" the girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Something within Karen stirred at the sight of the fragile child, and suddenly the petty complaints that had been swirling in her mind seemed to fade away. With a gentle smile, she pulled a chair up to the girl's bedside and began to read, her voice soft and soothing. As the minutes ticked by, Karen found herself becoming lost in the story, her earlier discomfort gradually giving way to a sense of purpose and connection. And in that moment, she realized that perhaps her time as a volunteer might not be as dreadful as she had initially thought. Over the next few weeks, Karen's time as a hospital volunteer proved to be a transformative experience. Gone were the days of barking orders and expecting instant gratification. Instead, she found herself immersed in the day-to-day challenges faced by the patients and their families. As she moved from one ward to the next, assisting with tasks ranging from meal delivery to bedside companionship, Karen began to develop a newfound appreciation for the dedicated healthcare professionals who worked tirelessly to care for their patients. The long hours, the emotional strain, and the constant need to remain calm and compassionate in the face of adversity. It was a far cry from the high-powered, high-stress world she had grown accustomed to. One day, as Karen was pushing a cart laden with freshly baked cookies through the hallways, she encountered a young mother sitting anxiously in the waiting room, her face etched with worry. Without hesitation, Karen approached the woman, offering her a warm smile and a fresh-baked treat. "You look like you could use a little pick-me-up," Karen said, extending the plate of cookies. "My name is Karen, and I'm one of the hospital's volunteers. Is there anything I can do to help?" The woman looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. "Oh, thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "My son is in surgery, and I'm so worried." Karen nodded sympathetically, taking a seat beside the woman and placing a gentle hand on her arm. "I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you," she said, her tone soft and soothing. But I want you to know that you're not alone. The doctors and nurses here are some of the best in the field, and they're doing everything they can to ensure your son's well-being." The woman's lips quivered as she accepted the cookie, taking a small bite. "I just wish I could be in there with him," she said, her gaze fixed on the closed doors of the operating room. "I know," Karen replied, squeezing the woman's arm reassuringly. "But sometimes the best thing we can do is to trust the professionals and take care of ourselves in the meantime. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your son? I'd love to hear more about him." As the woman opened up, sharing stories of her son's passions and dreams, Karen found herself genuinely engaged, her heart swelling with empathy and understanding. Gone was the entitled, impatient woman who had once thrown a tantrum in the very same hospital. In her place, a compassionate, empathetic individual who could see beyond her own needs and concerns. When the doctor finally emerged from the operating room, Karen was there to greet the relieved mother, offering a warm embrace and a sincere congratulations on her son's successful surgery. In that moment, Karen knew that her time as a hospital volunteer had not only transformed her outlook on life, but had also sown the seeds of a newfound purpose. As the weeks turned into months, Karen's transformation continued, her once rigid outlook on life gradually softening as she immersed herself deeper into the world of hospital volunteering. Gone were the designer handbags and the perfectly coiffed hair. In their place, a simple, practical attire and a demeanor that radiated a newfound sense of humility and compassion. One day, as Karen was making her rounds in the pediatric ward, she encountered a young boy who had been admitted with a severe case of the flu. The child's parents, both visibly exhausted and overwhelmed, were frantically trying to keep their son comfortable, but the strain on their faces was evident. Without hesitation, Karen approached the bedside, offering a warm smile and a gentle touch on the boy's forehead. "How are you feeling, sweetie?" she asked, her voice soft and soothing. The boy, his eyes barely open, managed a weak smile. "Tired," he whispered, his small hand reaching out for Karen's. Karen grasped the boy's hand, her heart swelling with empathy. "I know, sweetheart," she murmured, "but you're in good hands here. The doctors and nurses are going to take such good care of you." As she sat by the boy's bedside, Karen couldn't help but reflect on her own past behavior, the entitled tantrums, the demands for immediate attention, the lack of compassion for those around her. It was a stark contrast to the scene unfolding before her, where a family was facing the very real fears and challenges of having a sick child. Turning to the boy's parents, Karen offered a reassuring smile. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked, her voice filled with sincerity. "I know it can be overwhelming, but please don't hesitate to ask for anything you need." The mother, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, looked up at Karen with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. That's so kind of you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We could really use a break, if you don't mind sitting with him for a little while." Karen nodded, squeezing the mother's hand. "Of course," she replied, settling into the chair beside the boy's bed. "Take all the time you need. I'll be right here." As the parents left the room, Karen turned her attention back to the sick child, gently stroking his forehead and humming a soft lullaby. In that moment, she felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that she had never experienced before, a profound connection to the human experience that had eluded her for so long. It was a far cry from the entitled, self-centered woman who had once stormed through these very halls, and as Karen sat there, watching the steady rise and fall of the boy's chest, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this point. As the months passed, Karen's transformation continued to deepen, her once rigid persona giving way to a newfound compassion and empathy that had become the hallmark of her interactions with the patients and their families. One day, as she was making her rounds in the oncology ward, she encountered a young woman who had been recently diagnosed with a particularly aggressive form of cancer. The woman, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation, sat hunched in a chair, her hands trembling as she stared down at the stack of treatment options laid out before her. Without hesitation, Karen approached the woman, pulling up a chair beside her and gently placing a hand on her arm. "Hello," she said, her voice soft and soothing. "My name is Karen. I couldn't help but notice you look a bit overwhelmed. Would you like to talk about it?" The woman looked up, her eyes widening with surprise. "I am sorry. I don't mean to impose," she stammered. "It's just, there's so much to consider, and I'm not sure I'm making the right choices." Karen nodded, her expression empathetic. "I can only imagine how difficult this must be for you," she said. "But you're not alone. I'm here to support you in any way I can." The woman's lips quivered as she fought back tears. "I just feel so lost," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been through anything like this before, and I'm terrified of what the future holds." Karen squeezed the woman's arm, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know," she said, "but you're a fighter, and you have an amazing medical team here to guide you through this. Have you had a chance to talk to the oncologist about your options?" The woman shook her head, her gaze fixed on the papers in front of her. I'm just so overwhelmed. I don't even know where to start." "Well, why don't we take a look at those together?" Karen suggested, her tone reassuring. Sometimes it helps to have a fresh set of eyes and a listening ear. As the two women pored over the treatment options, Karen offered her insights and suggestions, gently guiding the patient through the maze of medical terminology and emotional turmoil. She listened intently, her heart swelling with empathy as the woman shared her fears and hopes, and together, they mapped out a plan of action that provided a glimmer of hope in the face of such daunting odds. By the time their conversation came to an end, the woman's expression had shifted from one of overwhelming despair to a newfound sense of determination. She reached out and squeezed Karen's hand, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." Karen smiled, her own eyes glistening with tears. "That's what we're here for," she said, her voice filled with a quiet confidence. "You're not alone in this, and we're going to fight this together, every step of the way." As she watched the woman walk away, a renewed sense of purpose filled Karen's heart. She had come so far from the entitled, self-centered woman she once was, and in the process, she had discovered a deeper well of compassion and resilience within herself. A transformation that would continue to shape the course of her life. The day had finally arrived. Karen's 1-year anniversary as a hospital volunteer. As she walked through the familiar corridors, she couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. Gone was the entitled, impatient woman who had once stormed through these very halls, her designer handbag swinging wildly at her side. In her place stood a compassionate, empathetic individual who had discovered a deeper purpose in life, one that transcended the material trappings she had once held so dear. As Karen made her way to the CEO's office, she couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. After all, it was the same man who had once sternly reprimanded her for her outrageous behavior, setting her on a path of personal transformation. When she arrived, the CEO greeted her with a warm smile, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Karen," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration, "I must say, I'm absolutely amazed by the progress you've made over the past year. You've truly become an integral part of our hospital community, and your dedication to our patients and their families has not gone unnoticed." Karen felt a surge of pride, her cheeks flushing with a mixture of humility and joy. "Thank you, Mr. CEO," she said, her voice brimming with sincerity. "This experience has changed me in ways I never could have imagined. I'm grateful for the opportunity you gave me, and for the chance to make a real difference in the lives of those we serve." The CEO nodded, his expression softening. "You know, when I first encountered you that day in the waiting room, I'll admit, I was a bit skeptical about whether you would truly embrace this role. But you've proven me wrong, Karen, and I couldn't be more proud of the person you've become." He paused, reaching into his desk drawer and pulling out a pristine white envelope. "Which is why I have a very special announcement to make." Karen's eyes widened with curiosity as the CEO handed her the envelope. "What's this?" she asked, her fingers trembling slightly as she broke the seal. "Open it and see," the CEO replied, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. As Karen unfolded the letter, her breath caught in her throat. It was a formal invitation to join the hospital's board of directors, a prestigious honor that was typically reserved for the institution's most generous and influential supporters. "Mr. CEO, I don't know what to say," she stammered, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. This is incredible." The CEO leaned forward, his expression warm and sincere. "Karen, you've proven that your commitment to this hospital goes far beyond mere financial contributions. Your tireless work as a volunteer, your compassion, and your unwavering dedication to our patients. That's the kind of leadership we need on our board." Karen nodded, her heart swelling with a newfound sense of purpose. "I promise I won't let you down," she said, her voice filled with determination. As she left the CEO's office, Karen couldn't help but reflect on the seismic shift that had taken place within her. The once entitled, self-absorbed woman had been transformed, her priorities realigned to focus on the needs of others rather than her own. And as she made her way back to the pediatric ward, a mischievous smile tugged at the corners of her lips. After all, who knew what other surprises lay in store for her, now that she had embraced a life of service and compassion?